Welcome to this explainer, where we're jumping right into the fascinating history of a weapon so powerful it shaped human history for over 100,000 years. And the craziest part? It was made from just a simple piece of string. You know, when we picture ancient warfare, our minds naturally go straight to gleaming swords, massive spears, or clouds of arrows raining down. But today, we're going to explore a weapon that could literally match the force of a modern firearm, using absolutely nothing but a woven cord and a rock.
So could a simple piece of string actually match the force of a modern gun? Let's start by completely throwing out everything pop culture has taught us, because a sling in the hands of a trained professional was absolutely not a child's toy. For decades, we've kind of relegated the sling to this plucky underdog's tool, right? Just some primitive thing for chasing wolves away from sheep. But as we'll see from historical records and modern ballistics tests, the truth is way darker. The sling was a staple of ancient armies, capable of crushing skulls, shattering armor, and just totally dropping heavily armed soldiers before they could even get within striking distance.
Section 1. The physics of the sling, where leverage equals sheer lethality.
To really understand how this works, we've got to look at the physics. A sling is basically just a string with a pouch in the middle. You hook your finger in one end, grab the other, load up your projectile, and let it rip. That string acts as an artificial extension of your arm, compounding your natural throwing power and turning a simple human motion into a lethal high-velocity launch system. Now compare an average stone to specialized military ammo. Throwing a nice smooth river rock will get you a really respectable speed, about 150 feet per second. But ancient armies were smart. They quickly figured out how to optimize this by casting biconical lead bullets. Lead is incredibly dense, meaning less surface area and less air resistance. When you launch one of these from a sling, it actually spins just like a modern rifle bullet, flying point first at a blistering 235 feet per second.
Let's do the math here, because the kinetic energy is just wild. A 50-gram lead bullet traveling at 235 feet per second hits with 128 joules of energy. That's roughly the equivalent of a modern .22 caliber long rifle. But if you step up to a heavy 200-gram lead bullet, you're suddenly generating 299 joules. That hits a target with the exact same devastating force as a modern .38 special revolver. It's crazy. And keep in mind, that's just based on an average modern thrower. A professional ancient slinger, someone who was literally bred for this from childhood, could theoretically hit up to 800 joules of energy, completely matching a .357 Magnum.
Moving on to Section 2, Carnage in the Lab. Let's look at some ballistics testing.
So, what does this massive amount of kinetic energy actually look like on the battlefield? Well, when tested against anatomically correct ballistics gel, the damage is absolutely catastrophic. A heavy lead bullet will completely cave in a thick bronze Roman cavalry helmet, literally tearing the face mask right off. And against an unprotected target, a direct hit to the skull just obliterates it, sending the projectile deep into the brain. But honestly, the most terrifying part is the penetration. A point-first lead bullet can punch straight through human ribs, shatter the bone, and travel right into the lungs. We're not just talking about blunt force trauma here. These were essentially ancient armor-piercing rounds.
Which brings us to a huge historical misconception. You know the biblical story of David and Goliath, right? Well, it turns out it was never an underdog story. David wasn't some helpless kid with a toy. He was an experienced warrior who essentially brought a gun to a sword fight. Think about it. Goliath was a heavily armored, slow-moving infantryman designed strictly for close-quarters combat. David, on the other hand, used a ranged weapon that could stop a man dead in his tracks from way outside sword range. A heavy stone to the forehead delivered with magnum force energy, that was an instant lethal strike.
All right, Section 3. Ancient snipers and artillery. Let's talk about the professionals.
Diving into the historical record, we can see how this simple tool evolved into the absolute earliest form of dedicated military artillery. Because the sling wasn't just used by isolated shepherds defending their flocks, it was a highly organized, devastatingly effective branch of almost every major ancient military. And it is incredibly old. String decays, obviously, so we don't have many physical artifacts. But the fact that Neanderthals made cordage implies slings could easily be over 100,000 years old. We've got drawings from the Levant dating back 9,000 years. And miraculously, the oldest physical slings preserved in Peru are about 4,500 years old. Over all those millennia, it evolved from a basic survival tool into a highly specialized, deadly discipline.
Now, the absolute masters of this weapon, the real elite professionals, were the Balearic slingers from the islands off the coast of Spain.
Ancient historians actually claim that mothers there trained their kids from infancy, literally refusing to give them their daily bread until they could knock it off a post with a sling stone. They were so unbelievably lethal that they served as highly paid mercenaries for Carthage. Hannibal himself used 2,000 of them to just batter the Roman lines. These guys would go into battle carrying 3 different lengths of slings, wrapped around their heads and waists, optimized for specific ranges. And they hurled massive, 595-gram stones that would just shatter enemy shields and armor alike.
But physical destruction wasn't their only advantage. A lot of these slings featured crackers on the end, these tiny tassels that, when whipped around, actually moved at over 1,000 miles per hour. That physically breaks the sound barrier. It creates this deafening, whip-like crack. Now just imagine thousands of enemy slingers doing this simultaneously. It was horrific psychological warfare. You're standing there hearing hundreds of tiny sonic booms every single second, invisible lead bullets are whizzing past your head, and the guys next to you are dropping dead.
And in what's honestly a darkly hilarious twist of ancient trash talk, Roman troops used to cast snarky insults directly into their lead bullets before raining them down on enemies. Archaeologists have dug up these ancient lead projectiles with phrases carved right into them. Stuff like, take this, catch, ouch, and even get pregnant with this. It just goes to show that thousands of years before the internet, the very human instinct to completely troll your enemies was already alive and well on the battlefield.
Section 4. A global reign of terror. Let's look beyond the Mediterranean.
Because this weapon wasn't just terrorizing Europe and the Mediterranean, it was independently mastered by totally unconnected cultures all across the globe. It's one of those rare, universal human technologies that just sprouted up everywhere. They were stones and a need for defense. From the Aztec armies in Mexico firing massive barrages alongside their bows, to the Incas up in the high Andes wielding crazy 86-inch llama wool slings, it was universally devastating. The Chamorro people of the Mariana Islands, the Polynesians, the Apache, the Inuit, they all integrated the sling into their survival and combat tactics. It was the ultimate accessible weapon, right? Cheap to make, and your ammo is quite literally just lying on the ground everywhere you look.
When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas and the Pacific, they very quickly learned to fear this weapon above pretty much all others. A Spanish missionary observing the Chamorros wrote down how unarmored men hit in the chest or head were literally flattened on the spot. Down in the Andes, conquistadors reported that an Incan slinger could snap a Spanish sword in 2 with a single stone. In fact, Francisco Pizarro's own brother, Juan, was killed during the siege of Cusco by an Incan stone straight to his unhelmeted head.
It was incredibly versatile, too. It wasn't just about blunt force. The sling was basically an early incendiary launcher. Julius Caesar actually wrote about his enemies heating clay shot until it was literally red hot, and then slinging it into Roman camps to set all their thatched roofs on fire. And halfway across the world, the Chamorro people independently figured out the exact same tactic. They stuffed perforated stones with burning tow to burn down enemy structures from a nice, safe distance.
And we really need to talk about the range. We usually think of the bow and arrow as the ultimate ancient ranged weapon, right? But while a classical bow shot an arrow about 650 feet, the modern world record for a sling is an astonishing 1,565 feet. That is massive. Even if you factor in modern materials for the record holder, ancient professionals easily outranged archers. This meant they could harass enemy lines, break up infantry formations, and safely attack fortresses long before the enemy could even fire back.
Section 5. The fall of the sling and its tactical evolution. So here's the big question. If this thing was as powerful as a pistol, universally accessible, had unlimited free ammo, and outranged the bow, why on earth did it vanish from the battlefield? Well, tactical evolution basically killed the sling in 3 distinct steps. First up, improved crossbows meant armies could suddenly field devastating ranged units with just a fraction of the lifelong training that a master slinger required. Second, the widespread adoption of full steel plate armor in the Middle Ages made knights practically immune to blunt force projectiles. And finally, the invention of gunpowder firearms just leveled the playing field completely, making all traditional ranged weapons totally obsolete.
Yet, despite being outpaced by modern tech, the sling stubbornly survived into the modern era. Because of its incredible leverage and simplicity, soldiers in the Spanish Civil War actually used slings to hurl grenades over city buildings. Finnish troops used them to launch Molotov cocktails at Soviet tanks during the Winter War. And incredibly, right now, in the high Andes of Peru, the sling is still used in traditional, highly dangerous ritual battles. Locals throw real stones at each other to shed blood, bestowing fertility upon the land in a practice that spans back thousands of years. So now that we've explored the mind-blowing ballistics, the kinetic energy, and the crazy global history of this weapon, I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you hear a historical tale of a simple shepherd with a sling, are you still going to think of them as an unarmed underdog? Or are you ready to completely rethink ancient history? Thanks for joining me for this explainer to uncover the true power of the ancient world's most accessible and definitely most deceptive weapon.